The evening air was calm, with the sun just beginning to dip behind the houses, casting long shadows across the quiet street. The neighborhood was peaceful, the kind of place where people waved to their neighbors and children played until the streetlights came on. One man, after a long day at work, decided to take his dog for a walk. The dog, a medium-sized mix with a curious nose and wagging tail, seemed excited to be out, sniffing every corner and chasing small movements in the bush. The man walked at a steady pace, enjoying the simple pleasure of being outside. Feeling the cool breeze on his face and hearing the distant sounds of evening routines in the homes around him, he had walked this route many times before. He knew when the old lady across the street would water her plants, when the kids 2 doors down would chase each other in the yard, and when the mail carrier usually arrived. The rhythm of the neighborhood was familiar and comforting. But on this particular evening, something unusual was about to happen. Something that would change the course of an ordinary walk into a moment. He would never forget Dot as he rounded the corner near the small park at the end of the block. He noticed a police car slowly driving past. He didn't think much of it. Police cars were a common sight, and the neighborhood was generally safe. The car seemed to slow down and then pulled over near him. At first, he thought it might be a routine check, or perhaps the officers were investigating a call in the area. He was calm, but as the passenger door opened and one of the officers stepped out, he felt a wave of unease. The officer was moving quickly, with a sense of urgency that made the man stop in his tracks. Before he could even say anything, the officer's hand moved to the side of his uniform and pulled out a gun. The weapon glinted in the fading light. The man froze instantly, the leash of his dog tightening in his hand as the dog sensed the tension and stopped mid-step, ears perked and tail stiff. He raised his hand slowly, trying to show he was not a threat, hoping the officer could see that he was just a regular person out walking his dog. "Stop right there," the officer commanded, his voice firm and unwavering. His eyes were scanning the man and his surroundings, alert to any sudden movements. The man's heart began to pound in his chest. He had never been in a situation like this before. He tried to speak, to explain, but his words came out in a nervous stammer. I'm just walking my dog, sir. Everything is fine. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer didn't lower his weapon. Every step the man made seemed cautious and deliberate, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. The dog, sensing its owner's stress, began to whine softly, pressing against his leg. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some stepping onto their porches to see what was happening. The quiet evening was suddenly filled with tension and the faint murmurs of concern from those nearby. The man kept his hands visible, fingers slightly spread, making sure not to make any sudden movements. He knew that any wrong move could escalate the situation. His mind raced, thinking about what could have caused the officer to react this way. He had never had any trouble with the law, never even received a traffic ticket. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. Was it something about the way he walked? The time of day? His appearance? The officer, for his part, was cautious and alert. He had been trained to assess threats quickly and respond decisively. His instincts were kicking in, his focus sharp. He had seen situations turn dangerous in seconds, and his job required him to be prepared for the worst. Still, he didn't have all the information about the man in front of him. Every detail mattered, every gesture, every word could mean the difference between a peaceful resolution and disaster. The man tried to stay calm, speaking slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not armed. I'm not dangerous. I'm just out walking my dog. I live just down the street. I can show you my ID if that helps." The officer's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to the man. He was trying to process the situation, weighing his options. The man's calm demeanor contrasted with the officer's heightened alertness. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move from either side could tip the scale. Time seemed to stretch as the man and the officer stood facing each other. The neighborhood, usually filled with the soft sounds of evening life, was quiet except for the occasional bark of the dog and the low murmur of concerned neighbors. The man's mind was racing, thinking about how to de-escalate the situation. He considered dropping the leash and raising both hands, but worried the dog might run or cause another complication. Every detail mattered. He decided to keep talking, using a calm and steady voice, hoping to humanize himself in the eyes of the officer. "I understand why you're being careful. I would be too if I were in your shoes. But I really am just out walking. Nothing is wrong. Please let me show you I'm not a threat." The officer's grip on the gun did not loosen, but there was a subtle shift in his posture. He was listening, evaluating, trying to read the man's intentions. He had to make a decision, and it had to be the right one. His training told him to be cautious, but his human judgment was also in play. He could see the fear, the sincerity in the man's eyes, and it gave him pause. As the tension hung in the air. The dog, sensing its owner's anxiety, barked softly and pulled slightly at the leash, pressing closer to the man. The small action reminded both men of the ordinary context of the situation. This wasn't a dangerous criminal confrontation. It was a misunderstanding, a scenario blown out of proportion by caution and circumstance. The neighbors continued to watch, some holding their phones, unsure whether to call anyone or wait and see. The man felt their eyes on him, adding to the pressure. He knew that if this escalated, the consequences could be severe. He had to find a way to communicate his innocence, to turn the situation around before it was too late. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. "Please, officer, I'm not a threat. Look at my dog. Look at me. I just want to go home safely. I don't want any trouble." The officer's gaze softened just a fraction. He was still cautious, but he began to see the situation more clearly. The man's voice was calm, deliberate, and there was no aggression in his posture. It was a human moment, a small crack in the tension that allowed reason to start to take hold. The dog, sensing a change in the atmosphere, relaxed slightly, wagging its tail tentatively. The officer, still holding his weapon, was now faced with a choice. He could maintain his stance, risking further fear and misunderstanding, or he could begin to de-escalate and seek more information. The man, aware of the fragile balance, prepared for whatever might come next. Hoping that communication and patience could resolve the situation, minutes felt like hours as they faced each other. Every movement, every word, every glance mattered. The man continued to speak in a calm, steady voice, explaining his routine, his familiarity with the neighborhood, and his respect for law enforcement. The officer listened, evaluating, thinking about his next steps. It was a tense standoff, a moment suspended in time, where the ordinary and the extraordinary collided, and then, in the midst of that quiet, tense evening, the man made a decision. He reached for his phone. It was a simple act, but it carried weight. It was a tool, a bridge to clarify identity, a potential key to ending the standoff peacefully. As he dialed the number, the officer's eyes followed his movements closely, every detail analyzed. Every possibility considered, the stage was set for the next moment, a turning point that would change the dynamic entirely. The calm evening had transformed into a high-stakes encounter, a test of judgment, patience, and communication. The ordinary walk had become extraordinary, and the man's quick thinking would soon play a pivotal role. The dog, unaware of the larger implications, stayed close to its owner, a small companion in a tense and uncertain moment. As the phone began to ring, the man felt a mix of fear and hope. Fear of what could happen if the officer misread his actions, and hope that the truth would come to light, that reason would prevail over fear. The officer, standing with his gun drawn but eyes focused, was about to receive information that would change everything. The quiet neighborhood, once peaceful, was now the backdrop for a story that no one would forget, a story where a simple phone call would carry the weight of preventing disaster. The seconds stretched into minutes as the man held his phone, the device feeling heavier in his hand with every passing moment. He could feel his heart racing and his palms were sweaty despite the cool evening air. The dog pressed closer, sensing the tension and mirroring his owner's unease. The officer, still holding his gun, watched every subtle movement, his training telling him to anticipate the unexpected. Both men were trapped in a silent dialogue, where gestures spoke louder than words. The man thought about how quickly life could change in situations like this. A simple misunderstanding had the power to escalate in a matter of seconds. He replayed the steps of his day in his mind, wondering what could have triggered such a strong reaction from the officer. Nothing unusual had happened. He had left work on time, walked the dog, waved to a few neighbors, and now he was here, facing a loaded gun pointed in his direction. It was surreal, almost like a dream he could not wake up from. His fingers hovered over the screen of the phone, dialing slowly. He needed the right words, the right tone, to convey urgency without escalating the situation further. He pressed call and held the phone close to his ear, hoping the voice on the other end would understand immediately. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly as he followed the movement. Noting that the man's demeanor was not aggressive, just cautious and tense, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds of distant traffic, laughter, and barking dogs had faded into an almost eerie silence. Windows were open just a crack, and people leaned out to watch, unsure of whether to intervene or wait for resolution. The street, once a place of comfort and routine, had become a stage for a tense confrontation that no one expected. The man spoke into the phone, his voice low but steady. He explained briefly who he was, why he was walking his dog, and asked for verification. Every word was deliberate, crafted to communicate honesty and calm. The officer, listening carefully, could hear the tone and see the sincerity in the man's body language. His eyes flicked from the man to the phone and back again, assessing, calculating, weighing the risk versus the reward of each action. The dog, a silent witness to the unfolding drama, shifted its weight from paw to paw, occasionally letting out a soft whine. It was clear that the dog trusted its owner, and this trust added another layer of pressure on the man to stay composed. He could not allow panic to take over. Any sign of fear could be misinterpreted in the high-tension scenario that had taken hold of the street. As the conversation on the phone progressed, the officer's posture began to change subtly. He was still alert, but the edge of uncertainty started to appear. His mind, trained to anticipate danger, began to process the new information. The calm, steady voice on the other end of the line was verifying the man's identity in a way that demanded respect. This wasn't just a routine call. It was a key that could unlock the truth and prevent a potentially dangerous escalation. The man spoke with clarity, providing details that were verifiable while keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. He made sure to keep his hands in view, holding the leash of the dog loosely to show there was no hidden threat. His every gesture was intentional, designed to communicate transparency and cooperation. The officer's eyes softened slightly as he observed the small signs of honesty and calm. Time seemed to slow even more. The man could feel the weight of the officer's gaze on him, a mix of caution, authority, and uncertainty. He thought about how the officer must feel, the pressure of responsibility, the need to make quick decisions in potentially life-threatening situations. It was a human moment, a shared understanding of fear, responsibility, and the fragility of trust. The neighbors, still observing, whispered quietly among themselves. Some had phones out, ready to record. Others were simply watching, unsure of how to react. The tension in the street was palpable, and yet in that tension there was also a sense of hope. Hope that communication would prevail, that reason and patience would prevent a tragedy. The man knew that his words, his tone, and his careful movements were all he had to influence the outcome. The officer shifted slightly, adjusting his stance but keeping his gun trained on the man. He spoke in a controlled, calm voice, asking questions that were meant to clarify the situation without escalating it further. His questions were deliberate, seeking facts while testing the man's responses for consistency and truth. The man answered each question carefully, maintaining eye contact, showing that he had nothing to hide. Each answer was a brick in the bridge of understanding they were building. Slowly, cautiously, in the middle of a tense street, the phone call continued, with the voice on the other end verifying credentials and providing confirmation that the man was indeed who he claimed to be. The officer's eyes flicked between the man and the phone, a silent battle waging inside him between caution and reason. He wanted to resolve the situation peacefully, but his training had conditioned him to expect the unexpected. The man sensed the shift in the officer's demeanor and felt a small glimmer of hope that this tense standoff could soon end. The dog, sensing the change in the atmosphere, relaxed slightly, wagging its tail in a cautious, tentative manner. It pressed against the man's leg, providing silent reassurance. The man took a slow breath, steadying his shaking hands, trying to convey calm and trust. He knew that every movement, every word, every gesture mattered. The officer was watching, analyzing, deciding what to do next. The minutes continued to pass, and the street, though still quiet, seemed to breathe with them. The man's mind raced with scenarios and outcomes, all the while maintaining a composed exterior. He thought about how quickly life could turn upside down and how small actions, like a phone call, could change everything. He realized that this moment, though frightening, was also a testament to the power of patience, communication, and understanding. Finally, the voice on the other end of the phone confirmed the man's identity fully. The officer's eyes widened slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. The realization of who the man was and the legitimacy of the situation began to sink in. The officer's grip on the gun loosened just a little, signaling a shift in the dynamic. The man remained calm, continuing to hold the leash and keeping his hands visible, reinforcing his honesty and compliance. The neighbors, sensing the change, exhaled quietly. The street, which had felt like a stage for a dangerous confrontation, now seemed to return to a state of cautious relief. The man and the officer were still in the middle of the street, but the tension had eased enough to allow for communication rather than confrontation. The dog, sensing the easing of stress, relaxed further. Lying down briefly and then looking up at its owner, the officer took another step back, lowering his gun slowly. His eyes still alert but no longer filled with the immediate tension of potential threat. He spoke in a calmer tone, asking follow-up questions to ensure there were no misunderstandings. The man answered with clarity and patience, reinforcing the trust that was slowly being rebuilt. Each word, each gesture, each measured breath contributed to de-escalating the situation entirely. As the sun continued to set, casting a golden glow over the street, the man felt a mixture of relief and gratitude. He had navigated a dangerous scenario through careful communication, patience, and quick thinking. The officer, having processed the new information, began to see the human side of the encounter. Realizing that what had started as a tense standoff was actually a misunderstanding that could have ended differently if not handled carefully. The dog, now calm and relaxed, nudged the man's leg affectionately. He patted the dog's head, feeling the reassurance of his companion and reflecting on the extraordinary events of the evening. What had started as a simple walk had turned into a test of composure, human judgment, and the power of verification. One phone call had indeed begun to change everything, opening the door to resolution and understanding. The officer finally holstered his gun, taking a step back and lowering his guard. He acknowledged the man verbally, a mix of apology and explanation in his tone. The man nodded, understanding the pressures the officer faced, grateful that reason and patience had prevailed. The street slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the memory of the standoff lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The man walked the rest of the route with his dog, each step careful and deliberate, reflecting on how fragile trust and safety could be. He knew that life could change in an instant, and he also knew that communication and understanding had the power to prevent disaster. The evening walk had become a lesson in human behavior, authority, and the delicate balance between caution and compassion. The memory of the tense moments would remain, a reminder of how one phone call, one action, could alter the course of events entirely. The phone continued to ring, each tone echoing in the quiet street like a heartbeat. The man gripped it tightly, his knuckles white from the pressure. But he spoke calmly into the receiver, knowing that his words could change the direction of the evening entirely. The officer's eyes were fixed on him, still cautious, but now with a flicker of curiosity and uncertainty. Every small movement the man made was measured and deliberate, designed to show he was nothing but a normal resident out walking his dog. The dog, sensing the tension, pressed close to its owner, its body trembling slightly, When someone finally answered on the other end of the line, the man explained the situation concisely. He spoke with a voice that was steady but urgent, explaining that he was being confronted by an officer who had his weapon drawn, and that verification of his identity was required. The officer observed silently, listening to every word, trying to read the situation without escalating it further. He had to decide how to proceed, balancing caution with reason, and every second mattered. The voice on the phone immediately understood the urgency, responding with a calm authority. They verified the man's identity and assured the officer that he posed no threat. The officer's eyes widened slightly as he listened, a mix of surprise and relief spreading across his face. It was as though a puzzle was suddenly being completed and the missing piece was falling into place. The man exhaled slowly, feeling a small wave of relief wash over him. Though he remained vigilant, knowing the situation was not over, the officer lowered the gun slightly, though he still kept a watchful eye on the man. He needed to process this new information to make sure there were no gaps or misinterpretations. The man continued to hold the leash of his dog, his hands steady now, and spoke in a calm voice, reinforcing that he was compliant and cooperative. His words were simple, honest, and deliberate, aimed at building trust and easing the tension that had gripped the street for what felt like an eternity. Neighbors had gathered in small groups along the sidewalks and porches, whispering to each other and watching closely. They could sense that something important was unfolding, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. The dog barked softly, its way of breaking the silence, and the man patted its head gently, grounding himself in the familiar presence of his companion. The street, usually quiet at this hour, had become a stage for a human drama that no one would soon forget. As the officer listened to the verification, his mind raced with questions and considerations. He had been trained to expect the unexpected, to react swiftly to potential threats, and to make split-second decisions that could save or end lives. Yet here he was faced with the human side of law enforcement, the need to trust, to assess without assumption, and to acknowledge that mistakes could happen. The man's calm demeanor, the reassurance of the phone call, and the visible presence of the dog all worked together to slowly shift the officer's perception. The man's phone conversation was deliberate. He explained his routine, his presence in the neighborhood, and his identity in simple, verifiable terms. He made sure not to rush or sound defensive, knowing that tone mattered as much as the words themselves. The officer's attention never wavered, each syllable carefully processed, each movement observed. There was a silent negotiation happening, a dialogue that did not require aggression, only honesty and patience. The voice on the phone reassured the officer that there was no immediate threat. They provided details that only someone familiar with the man could know, and that verification instantly changed the dynamics of the encounter. The officer's posture shifted again, a subtle relaxation in his shoulders and a slight easing of tension in his face. He remained alert, of course, but the sense of danger that had hung thick in the air began to dissipate. The man continued to speak calmly, emphasizing cooperation and understanding. He explained that he had never had any trouble with the law, that he respected the role of police officers, and that his intention was simply to enjoy a peaceful evening with his dog. Each sentence was delivered carefully, without haste or defensiveness, showing that he was conscious of the power dynamics and the potential consequences of any misstep. The officer, now processing the verification, began to ask more direct questions, testing consistency and seeking clarity. The man answered each question with honesty, offering details without over-explaining. His calm, measured responses created a space where tension could ease, where reason could take over from fear. The dog, sensing the shift, wagged its tail lightly, providing a small sign of normalcy in an otherwise extraordinary moment. The minutes stretched as verification continued, but the mood gradually changed. The officer's voice became softer, his movements less rigid, and the street, once tense with uncertainty, began to feel like a space where understanding could exist. The neighbors, sensing the change, relaxed slightly, though they continued to watch attentively. Aware that the resolution was still unfolding, the man reflected on the power of communication in moments like these. A simple call, a calm voice, and honest words had begun to bridge the gap between fear and trust. He thought about how easily misunderstandings could escalate into danger, how small gestures could shift perceptions, and how patience and clarity could avert disaster. Every word he spoke and every movement he made contributed to diffusing the situation. The officer, now more confident in the information he had received, slowly lowered his weapon completely. He stepped back, allowing space between himself and the man, signaling a shift from confrontation to dialogue. The man's body language remained calm, and the dog, sensing the safety, relaxed fully, lying down at his feet. The transformation in the atmosphere was noticeable to everyone watching. A testament to the effectiveness of reasoned communication. The man continued the phone call just long enough to ensure that all verification was complete, then ended it with gratitude. The officer, now fully aware of the man's identity and intentions, nodded and spoke in a tone that mixed apology with relief. He explained that the initial reaction was based on protocol and caution, and that the new information allowed him to correct the situation without conflict. The man accepted the explanation, understanding the pressures and responsibilities the officer carried. The dog, happy to sense the return of calm, wagged its tail vigorously and pressed against the man's legs. He patted its head gently, grateful for the companionship that had kept him grounded during the tense encounter. The officer observed, nodding slightly, recognizing the normalcy that had returned to what had been a highly charged situation just moments before. As the sun dipped further below the horizon, the street returned to a quieter state. Neighbors began to retreat indoors, still whispering about the events they had witnessed, while the man and his dog continued their walk, this time with a much lighter atmosphere. The officer watched them for a moment, then returned to his vehicle, reflecting on the lesson learned and the importance of verification before escalation. The man thought about the fragility of trust, the speed at which fear could take hold, and the power of one phone call to alter the course of events. He walked slowly, savoring the peaceful evening that had returned, grateful that reason and human connection had prevailed over fear and assumption. The dog trotted beside him, oblivious to the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred, yet providing constant companionship and reassurance. This evening would remain etched in the man's memory, a reminder of how quickly life could change and how small, thoughtful actions could make the difference between conflict and resolution. It was a story of caution, patience, communication, and humanity, all unfolding on an ordinary street during a simple walk with a dog. The events highlighted the delicate balance between authority and understanding, fear and trust, and the enduring power of human connection to overcome tense situations. Every step forward on the familiar path felt like a celebration of calm regained, a victory of patience and honesty over misunderstanding. The man knew that, in the future, he would always remember this evening not just for the tension and fear, but for the way clarity and communication could turn a potentially dangerous encounter into a story of relief and human understanding. The officer stood quietly for a moment, still processing the confirmation he had just received. His gun was holstered now, and the tension that had filled the street began to dissipate slowly. The man, though relieved, remained cautious, aware that the situation could still change if anything was misunderstood. His dog stayed close, wagging its tail lightly, a silent companion offering reassurance and grounding him in the normalcy of their familiar evening routine. The neighbors, who had been watching from windows and porches, started to relax as well. Some whispered among themselves, commenting on the sudden turn of events, while others quietly returned to their homes, reassured that no harm had come to anyone. The street, once a stage of tension and fear, was slowly returning to its usual calm, though the memory of the confrontation lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The man spoke calmly to the officer, trying to bridge the gap between misunderstanding and resolution. He explained his routine, his familiarity with the neighborhood, and his respect for law enforcement. His words were measured, showing that he understood the officer's position and the responsibilities that came with it. The officer listened, nodding occasionally, processing the information while reflecting on how quickly a situation could escalate without clarity. The dog, sensing the easing tension, moved around happily, sniffing the ground and occasionally looking up at its owner for reassurance. Its presence had been a source of comfort throughout the encounter, reminding both men that the situation involved ordinary people in an everyday context, not threats or criminals. The man patted the dog's head gently, taking comfort in its calmness as he also tried to steady his own nerves. The officer finally spoke, his voice softer and more measured than before. He acknowledged the verification, explaining that his initial reaction had been based on protocol and the need to be cautious. He apologized for any fear or distress caused, demonstrating the human side of law enforcement, where mistakes could happen but recognition and correction were possible. The man listened patiently, understanding that the officer's actions were guided by duty, training, and the responsibility to protect the public. As they talked, the street slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The distant sounds of evening life, the rustle of leaves, children playing, cars passing, once again filled the air. The tension that had gripped the street was replaced by a sense of relief and normalcy, though the memory of the standoff remained vivid. The man reflected on the fragility of trust, how quickly fear could arise, and how a single action like a phone call could redirect the course of events entirely. He spoke with the officer about the importance of communication, the need to assess situations carefully, and the value of verifying facts before taking action. The officer nodded, acknowledging the lessons learned, and expressed appreciation for the calm manner in which the man had handled the situation. It was a conversation rooted in mutual understanding and respect, highlighting the human aspect of what had unfolded. The dog, now more relaxed, sat quietly by the man's side, occasionally glancing up to see his reaction. Its presence served as a reminder that the evening had been ordinary at its core, a simple walk turned tense due to caution, misunderstanding, and the responsibility carried by those in uniform. The man took a deep breath, feeling gratitude for the calm resolution and the return to safety. Neighbors began to emerge cautiously, curious about the outcome. Some approached to offer reassurance, while others simply observed from a safe distance. The man smiled politely, acknowledging their concern without going into unnecessary detail. The officer, too, was aware of the eyes on the scene and remained professional, understanding the importance of maintaining public trust and demonstrating the resolution of the situation. The man continued his walk, speaking gently to the dog and reflecting on how fragile life could be in moments of misunderstanding. He thought about the power of calmness, clear communication, and verification in resolving tense encounters. Each step forward was a reminder that patience and reason could avert conflict, and that human connections had the ability to transform situations that seemed perilous into opportunities for understanding. The officer, meanwhile, returned to his vehicle, taking a moment to review the encounter in his mind. He considered the choices he had made, the factors that had influenced his actions, and the lessons he would carry forward. It was a reminder that authority and responsibility required constant awareness, careful judgment, and a willingness to adapt when new information became available. The man's thoughts wandered to the broader implications of the evening. He realized that fear and misunderstanding could escalate quickly, but that human communication, honesty, and patience could redirect the course of events. He felt a sense of relief that the situation had been resolved without harm, and gratitude for the role that verification and clear information had played in preventing a potential tragedy. As the evening progressed and the sky darkened, the neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet, peaceful state. The man continued his walk, feeling the gentle breeze and hearing the familiar sounds of suburban life. The dog trotted beside him happily, unaware of the tension that had filled the street just hours earlier. The memory of the confrontation would remain with the man, a vivid reminder of the delicate balance between caution, misunderstanding, and human connection. He thought about the officer, recognizing that mistakes could happen in high-pressure situations, and that the ability to acknowledge and correct them was essential. He understood that both parties had acted according to their knowledge, training, and perceptions, and that the resolution required patience, calmness, and the willingness to communicate openly. It was a lesson in empathy, understanding, and the human dimension of law enforcement, the man's walk continued, each step a reminder of the importance of remaining calm under pressure. He reflected on the neighborhood, the street that had become the scene of a tense confrontation, and the role of human judgment in every interaction. The dog, happy and relaxed, provided silent companionship. A grounding force amid the complex emotions of the evening, the officer, now back in his vehicle, reviewed the events once more. Considering what could have been done differently and what had worked well, he recognized the importance of verification, the need to assess situations carefully, and the power of human interaction to de-escalate tension. It was a moment of reflection, learning, and understanding that would stay with him long after the evening had ended. The man, continuing his walk home, thought about the lessons of the night, the fragility of trust, the speed at which fear could arise, and the power of communication to transform tense situations into moments of understanding. Each breath of fresh evening air reminded him that calmness, patience, and empathy could prevent escalation, and that human connection was the key to resolving even the most challenging encounters. The street gradually emptied. Neighbors retreating to their homes, the sounds of the evening life resuming their gentle rhythm. The man felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that the confrontation had ended without harm. The dog, walking loyally by his side, was a silent witness to the resilience, calmness, and patience that had guided him through the ordeal. As he approached his front door, the man reflected on the extraordinary nature of the ordinary walk. What had started as a simple routine had transformed into a lesson in human behavior, authority, and understanding. The evening had tested patience, judgment, and the ability to remain composed under pressure, and the resolution had demonstrated the power of reason, communication, and trust. The officer, now driving away, contemplated the responsibilities of his role, the need for vigilance, and the human side of law enforcement. He understood that every decision carried consequences, and that verification, communication, and patience were crucial tools in maintaining safety and preventing misunderstanding. The events of the evening would remain with him as a reminder of the delicate balance between caution and empathy. The man entered his home, feeling the relief and calm that had returned after the tense confrontation. He reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of clear communication, the value of verification, and the power of patience and honesty. The dog, happy to be indoors, settled near his feet, a reminder of the companionship that had sustained him through the ordeal. The neighborhood returned fully to its peaceful state, though the memory of the evening lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The man, grateful for the calm resolution, knew that the lessons of patience, communication, and human connection would stay with him, guiding future actions and interactions. The extraordinary events of a simple evening walk had become a testament to the power of reason and empathy, and a reminder that one calm, thoughtful action could change everything. The following morning, the neighborhood seemed to carry a quiet energy, a mixture of relief and curiosity from the previous evening. People spoke softly among themselves as they stepped out to check their mail or water their gardens, exchanging stories about what had happened. The man, now safe and calm at home, reflected on the events with a mixture of awe and gratitude. A simple walk with his dog had turned into a life-changing experience, one that would remain in his memory for years to come. He prepared breakfast, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, thinking about the tension that had filled the street. Every step, every word, and every gesture from the night before replayed in his mind. He thought about the officer, the training, and the instinct that had caused him to react so quickly. It was a reminder of the pressures law enforcement officers face and how easily a misunderstanding could escalate. Yet he also felt a deep appreciation for how patience, communication, and calm had helped prevent disaster. As he walked his dog again later in the morning, the neighborhood seemed transformed. Neighbors greeted him warmly, some with a hint of curiosity in their eyes, others with a sense of admiration for how the situation had been resolved. The man responded with polite smiles and brief nods, choosing not to dwell on the intense fear and tension of the previous evening. Instead, he focused on the small comforts of routine, the joy of walking with his dog, and the peace of a quiet street. The officer, meanwhile, had returned to his daily duties but carried the memory of the encounter with him. He thought about the decisions he had made, the training that guided him, and the human judgment that allowed him to step back when verification clarified the situation. It was a lesson in humility, patience, and the importance of seeing beyond fear to the human reality of the people he served. He shared his experience with colleagues, emphasizing the value of communication and verification to prevent unnecessary escalation. Back on the street, the man continued his morning walk, reflecting on the power of simple actions. A phone call, a calm voice, and honest words had prevented potential tragedy. He considered the importance of human connection, understanding, and the willingness to see the other side of a tense situation. Even in moments of fear, compassion and clarity could change the outcome, and he felt grateful that he had been able to act thoughtfully under pressure. As he moved along the familiar path, he noticed small changes in the neighborhood. People seemed more cautious, but also more aware of their surroundings. Children played quietly in yards, dogs barked in the distance, and the soft rustle of leaves reminded him that life continued even after moments of fear. The memory of the gun, the tense standoff, and the phone call lingered, but he felt a sense of empowerment knowing that reason and patience had prevailed. He thought about the officer again, imagining the internal reflections and lessons learned. How easily fear could cloud judgment, how quickly assumptions could escalate into danger, and how a single piece of verified information could change everything. The man understood that both parties had acted with intention and responsibility, guided by their roles, perceptions, and human instincts. It was a shared experience marked by tension, fear, resolution, and ultimately understanding. Throughout the day, he spoke softly to his dog, sharing thoughts as though the companion could understand. The dog responded with gentle nudges and attentive eyes, a grounding presence amid the weight of reflection. Each step forward was a reminder of the ordinary nature of life, contrasted against the extraordinary intensity of the previous evening. The man felt grateful for the lessons learned and the calm that had returned to the neighborhood. Neighbors occasionally approached, offering words of concern or curiosity, and he responded with simple honesty without dramatizing the events. The story of the evening had already begun to circulate, but he chose to focus on what mattered most: the power of communication, the importance of patience, and the recognition of human vulnerability in moments of fear. His reflection was personal, grounded, and focused on understanding rather than blame. As the day progressed, he considered how to move forward with a sense of purpose. The experience had been intense, but it had also been a lesson in resilience, empathy, and human connection. He resolved to carry these insights with him, applying them in small ways to daily life. Every conversation, every interaction, and every decision could benefit from patience, calmness, and the willingness to understand before reacting. He spent the afternoon walking through familiar streets, observing the rhythm of the neighborhood. Life was continuing, but with a subtle awareness of the events that had transpired. Each familiar sound, the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of children, the soft hum of a car reminded him of the extraordinary within the ordinary. The memory of the confrontation with the officer remained vivid, but it was tempered by the reassurance that human reasoning, empathy, and communication had prevented harm. The man reflected on how quickly fear could arise, how assumptions could escalate, and how small, deliberate actions could redirect outcomes. A single phone call, made with clarity and calm, had turned a tense standoff into a moment of understanding and resolution. He considered the lesson that in life, even in moments of fear and uncertainty, thoughtful communication and patience could transform situations, sometimes in ways that seemed almost miraculous. As evening approached, he returned home with his dog, feeling a deep sense of relief and gratitude. The neighborhood had returned to its peaceful rhythm, but the memory of the events lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the power of human connection. The man reflected on the officer, the role of law enforcement, and the shared responsibility of people to act with care, clarity, and understanding in moments of tension. He He realized that the story was not just about fear or confrontation, but about the human capacity to respond thoughtfully, to recognize shared vulnerability, and to seek resolution rather than escalation. It was a lesson that could apply in many areas of life, beyond the specific circumstances of the street and the standoff with the officer. Human connection, patience, and honesty were universal tools for navigating uncertainty. The man prepared for the night, reflecting on the lessons and insights of the day. The memory of the officer, the phone call, and the calm resolution remained vivid, shaping his perspective on caution, responsibility, and empathy. He thought about how ordinary moments like a walk with a dog could unexpectedly become extraordinary, and how human judgment and communication could influence the outcomes of such moments. He spoke softly to his dog, who had been a constant companion throughout the ordeal, providing comfort and grounding. Each nuzzle and attentive gaze from the dog reinforced the sense of calm and companionship that had carried him through the tense evening. The man felt gratitude for this presence, for the ability to navigate fear with patience, and for the opportunity to reflect on the human lessons embedded in the experience. As night fell, the neighborhood became quiet, and the man sat by his window, watching the stars appear in the sky. The events of the previous evening and day played through his mind like a vivid story, filled with tension, fear, clarity, and resolution. He realized that what had happened was not just a personal experience, but a reminder of the delicate balance of trust, caution, and human understanding that exists in every interaction. He thought about the officer, the responsibilities carried by those in authority, and the human side of decision-making under pressure. The memory of the gun and the tense standoff remained, but it was now accompanied by relief, understanding, and gratitude. The man understood that fear could be managed, assumptions could be challenged, and that communication, patience, and honesty could prevent disaster. The dog lay peacefully at his feet, a reminder of the ordinary joys of life and the grounding presence of companionship. The man reflected on the extraordinary nature of the evening, the lessons learned, and the insights gained about human behavior, responsibility, and the power of calm communication. The tension and fear of the previous evening had been transformed into understanding, resilience, and a deep appreciation for human connection. As he prepared to sleep, he thought about how small actions, clear words, and patient listening could influence outcomes in ways that might seem improbable. The evening had taught him about the fragility of trust, the potential for misunderstanding, and the capacity for reason and empathy to prevent harm. It was a story he would carry with him, a reminder that even in moments of fear, thoughtful action could change everything. In the quiet of his home, he reflected on the extraordinary lessons embedded in an ordinary walk. He had learned about caution, communication, patience, and human connection. He had seen firsthand how quickly fear could arise and how one calm, verified action could redirect the course of events. The dog, serene and content, reinforced the sense of grounding and reassurance that had been critical throughout the experience. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his safety, for the resolution of the situation, and for the lessons that would guide his understanding of human interactions in the future. The extraordinary evening walk had become a story of patience, reason, communication, and the enduring power of empathy. One phone call had truly changed